At 0612 hours, these 3 Russian aircraft had no idea a dozen FP-2 drones were screaming over the Black Sea at 80 meters altitude, headed straight.
At 0418 hours, nothing was firing, nothing was exploding, and nothing looked wrong. That was the most dangerous part, because by the time Russian commanders realized what Ukraine had just done, the outcome was already locked in, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. The operation didn't begin with missiles or airstrikes. It began with silence. Across a wide stretch of occupied territory, Russian air defense crews were staring at calm radar screens, seeing the same empty sky they had seen 1,000 times before. No fast movers, no cruise missiles, no obvious threat. What they didn't know was that Ukraine had already slipped past the first and most important layer of defense: Russian expectations. Ukraine wasn't trying to overwhelm the system. It was trying to confuse it, slow it down, and force it to make the wrong decisions at exactly the wrong time. Just before dawn, small Ukrainian systems began moving into position. They weren't loud, they weren't fast, and they weren't impressive on paper. Most were flying low, some barely above treetop level, moving at speeds that radar software had been trained for years to ignore. Russian air defenses are built to stop jets, bombers, and high-speed missiles. Their algorithms are designed to filter out clutterbirds, weather civilian noise. Ukraine knew this, and it used that knowledge like a weapon. The first wave wasn't meant to destroy anything, it was meant to be seen, but not taken seriously. On Russian radar screens, contacts appeared and disappeared. Blips flickered. Tracks refused to lock. Operators reported strange returns that didn't behave like aircraft, but didn't fully vanish either. Command centers hesitated. Was this interference? A malfunction? Another false alarm? Every second spent questioning was a second Ukraine was buying. And while Russian crews argued with their screens, the real attack was already moving. Behind the slow, obvious contacts came the real strike elements. These systems followed preloaded routes, navigating without relying on GPS signals that Russia could jam. Cameras compared the ground below with stored satellite imagery, correcting their position again and again, quietly and precisely. Jamming systems screamed into the air, flooding the spectrum with noise, but it didn't matter. You can jam a signal, you can't jam the ground itself. The drones knew exactly where they were, even when Russian operators didn't. By the time the first Russian commander authorized engagement, the geometry was already wrong. Air defense vehicles were facing the wrong direction. Missile systems were active but blind, searching for targets that had already passed their engagement zones. Some systems couldn't fire because the targets were too slow. Others couldn't fire because the targets were too close. Layers that were supposed to protect each other had been separated by minutes of confusion and bad assumptions. Then the strikes began. Not all at once, not dramatically. One system went dark, then another. Communications links dropped. A radar stopped transmitting, then another began feeding nonsense data into the network. Russian units were still technically intact, but they were no longer working together. Each crew was fighting its own private battle, unaware that the bigger picture had already collapsed. At this point, Russia still had weapons, still had missiles, still had aircraft. What it no longer had was time. Ukraine had forced the system into reaction mode, and reaction mode is where rigid centralized defenses perform the worst. Orders lagged behind reality. Targets were reported that no longer existed. Missiles were prepared for threats that had already moved on. Every decision was late, and being late in modern warfare is the same as being wrong. By the time Russian leadership realized what Ukraine had just done, the operation was already ending. The damage was